Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wondercide comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed, lab-proven to work fast, and proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wondercide's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wondercide.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wondercide.com. Wondercide. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wondercide today.
Why didn't engineer Alan Parsons get rich off of Dark Side of the Moon? Was Bruce Kulick responsible for the Kiss reunion in 1996? Which band fired members of their crew for requesting too much chocolate on their tour rider? And what did bassist Bob Daisley have to say about the passing of his former bandmate, Ozzy Osbourne? All those questions answered next on Booked on Rock.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. We have a first-time guest on the show, Michael Pursche. He is the author of Sitting in a Bar in Adelaide, 15 Years of Podcasting. The book covers highlights from what is Australia's longest-running classic rock podcast, also called Sitting in a Bar in Adelaide. It's now in its, I believe, 18th year. Michael, welcome. Great to speak with a fellow podcaster.
Hello, Eric. Great to say hello, mate. Great to say hello from the other side of the world.
Yeah. Is it 18 years? Do I got it right?
Yeah. 2007 I started, and I didn't think I'd last the end of the year, the end of that year.
And here you are. There are so many people that you spoke to put this book together. Tell us about all the people that you speak with. How did this project all come about?
It was actually difficult to trim it down, Eric, because I had so many to choose from. It was hard. I tried to get a balance between people, because of course in Australia, I guess 50% or more of my interviews are local guys, which not everyone around the world would know. Some people will. So I tried to have a balance of both and sort of try and even it up a bit. But it came about the 15th year of the podcast. An internet page called BuzzFeed did a poll on the top classic rock podcasts in the world, and I was totally surprised that I made the list. So I was very chuffed and was talking to my daughter one day about it, and she said, "Oh, you should write a book." And I didn't realise how much work it was when I thought that was a good idea. So it took me an entire year, every waking moment that I had to put it together. I had to go through all my interviews that I'd done up to that stage and try and cull them down. So 125 ended up being how many I did, and that was the maximum that I could fit into a book.
Yeah, so you had to transcribe all of them.
Well, I found a program that would do that, and that was okay to the point where because we're talking music, there's a lot of names of bands and names of tunes and albums that it didn't recognise, and also it had trouble with my Australian accent, so it took me forever
Yes.
to edit it. It was okay to. It was okay to do the initial work, but to edit it took forever.
Yeah, AI software, it's good, but it's not that good to where it's going to pick up on every single thing you say. Well, tell us where you're from. Are you originally from Australia, born and raised? And I'm also curious as to what got you into classic rock, and you're a musician as well?
I'm in Adelaide, which is in the south of Australia, and it's only a city of about 1 million people. So we're not the biggest, not one of the big cities in Australia, but it's a rock and roll city. It always has been. Even back in the 60s, a lot of English migrants came to Adelaide, and they were all rock and roll people. So um, the music industry in Adelaide has always punched beyond its weight in Australia from music. As an example, guys that you might know, Rick Springfield's band in Australia was called the Zoot, and they were from Adelaide back in the 60s. So he was actually from Melbourne, but the initial band came from Adelaide. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
there's a lot of connections of guys that you might know. Bon Scott from AC/DC lived here for a while and ended up actually joining AC/DC in Adelaide. They came through Adelaide in 1974, and they were ready to change singers. And Bon Scott was their roadie, was a local roadie. So he ended up getting up on stage with them at a club after they played their gig, and the rest is history.
You're a musician yourself?
I'm a drummer, yes. So people would argue that I'm not a musician, but
Yeah. But you have a love of music. When did music get into your blood? What was the first time you fell in love with music?
I remember, like, I'm in my 60s, so it was AM radio back then, Eric. Like, so I had a transistor radio under my pillow in my bed when I was
That's awesome.
10 years old, listening to the radio. And yeah, it just took over and over and over. And yeah, I guess when I was a teenager, it's weird that I think most of us in our teenage years, the music that we liked or heard stays with us, and that classic rock for me from the 70s and going back has just stayed with me, and luckily there's still plenty around. And although it's sad, a lot of the guys that I loved when I was a teenager are getting to that age where they're passing away, but there's still plenty of guys holding the flag. And I see you've got a Van Halen flag in the back there. Great example of those guys took it to another level in the 80s and beyond, and inspired a lot more bands that are still making great music now. So it just hopefully goes on forever.
Did you have anybody that inspired your interviewing style? Because you do make people feel comfortable. You can tell when you're talking to these artists, these musicians, it's like a conversation between two friends. It's almost as if you knew them for a long time. So I'm curious if you grew up listening to anybody or on television that you emulated.
Not really. I read a lot of music magazines. There was two very popular music magazines in Australia in the 70s. One called Juke magazine, Juke, and one called Ram magazine, and that stood for Rock Australia magazines. And they were old school, like Cream was in the United States. So they weren't glossy publications, but they had long form interviews with people, and I loved reading them. And a lot of the interviews they did were with guys from the UK or the United States that we didn't hear on the radio. So as an example, Blue Oyster Cult and bands like that did not get played here, but still had interviews in those magazines that I learnt about. So I think I loved all that back then. And yeah, there were guys on the radio, but there was no real long form music interview stuff around back then.
In the beginning, was it tough getting interviews, or you talk about that in the book, how you kind of surprised there were some people you were able to reach pretty quickly?
I guess the advent of the internet made it easy. I found, even though it was early days, I found a couple of Australian guys that had a presence on the internet, and I could talk to normally their publicist or their manager, and this is what I do. I'd love to say hello, and it snowballed from there. So the first interview I ever did was with a guitar player called Kevin Borich, his name is, and he's not a well-known guy around the world, but he should be. He is up there with Joe Walsh, and he is one of Australia's great. He's actually originally from New Zealand, but he is one of the world's greatest guitar players. He's played with so many guys in Australia, and even with Joe Walsh, there was a sort of a super group that kicked around Australia for years called the Party Boys. And they would be mostly Australian guys, but they would bring guys from overseas and do a tour around the country and play some of their tunes, cover versions. So Joe Walsh did it for a while, and Eric Burden from the Animals did it for a while. So Kevin Borich was the main guitar player in that band, and I remember Joe Walsh saying he was one of the greatest guitar players that he'd ever played with. So he was my first one, and it sort of snowballed from there. So, but I guess what I found from speaking to people from overseas is they've been to Australia and had a great time, so I can sort of work off that, which is always good. And if they haven't been to Australia, some of their musical mates have been here, and till you've got to come to Australia. We love rock and roll. We look after the guys that come and see us. So that works very well for me. But I guess the other thing is I'm interested in their music. I don't care who their girlfriend is this week. I don't care, if they're whatever they did in the past with whatever substances. I'm not interested. I really just want to hear about their music. So, and that seems to put me in good stead. These guys, maybe are used to people trying to get the dirt on them, and
I'm sure. Yep, and they appreciate that. They absolutely appreciate that, I'm sure. Well, let's get into some of the interviews that you've done. Let's start with Alan Parsons, one of the most respected recording engineers and producers. He also had the successful band, the Alan Parsons Project. He received a Grammy nomination for his engineering work on Dark Side of the Moon. But what may surprise people to know is that Alan did not get rich off of that album.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I was just blown away to have the opportunity to talk to Alan, the first Alan Parsons album just blew me away, and I've been a huge fan ever since. But we got to talking about Pink Floyd, and he said he had the option of having a royalty in perpetuity, for the sales of the album, and he chose to just take a fee, which I can't remember exactly what he said, but it might have been something in the realm of £2,000 he got paid, and that was it. So yeah, he certainly did not make a fortune, and we just assume that he did, which is unfortunately a common story in entertainment, isn't it?
Sure, but he parlayed that into a career, obviously, that paid off well. But it is surprising because he's the only one that got a Grammy nomination, that's the other insane thing, is that Dark Side of the Moon did not win a Grammy.
But it's still in the charts now.
Yes. Yes. You spoke with Steve Howe, the legendary guitarist of Yes.
I'm a huge Yes fan, and I stumbled across a PR agent in the UK who looked after Yes and Asia and a lot of bands like that, and just opened this Pandora's box for me that was just blew me away. And Steve Howe, I actually spoke to Steve Howe about a solo album that he had coming out. And Yes had not been in Australia since 1973. They came out here when Close to the Edge came out, and I was too young to go and see them. I was maybe 9 years old, so I didn't go and see them. And I vaguely recall them on the radio, but only just. So Steve, during that interview, dropped it on me that Yes were coming to Australia. So for about the last half of the interview, I could hardly speak. I was so excited that they were coming, and they weren't coming to my part of Australia, but I packed up and flew over to Sydney and saw them play, and that was John Anderson was not in the band at that stage. It was the new Yes that's still going around now, but Chris Squire was still alive, and it was 2014, and 2011 was the first time, and they came back in 2014. But they were fantastic. It was surreal to see them play. Just so you guys are so lucky in the States. You get to see guys like that nearly every year, and we really don't. But the tyranny of distance, my friend.
Yeah, well, they're on the Fragile tour right now. They're playing all of Fragile, and I guess they're not going to be taking that tour to Australia. I know they have some dates coming up.
Not that I'm aware of, but they did have a great time here, and they came back, as I said, a few years later, but they haven't been for over 10 years. And again, Australia doesn't have a huge population. It's a long way between cities, and it's a long haul to get here. So it's always been a bit of an issue that a lot of bands we don't see here. Like there's so many, I could list so many great American bands that I love that have never been to Australia, like Kansas and Styx and guys like that who I would love to see, but they've never made it across the Pacific, sadly.
Well, you had a friend of the podcast, Tim Derling, on recently to talk about the books he's written. One of them is Kansas, on Kansas.
Classic example. All the guys that we spoke about that Night Ranger and Kansas and Y&T that we spoke about
Mm-hmm.
were really not well known here at all. They had no radio play, and it was only, I guess, in recent years in the internet that music's easier to get to. But the only thing that we had in Australia that gave us a glimpse of those bands back in my day when I was a teenager was Rock Concert, the TV program, John Kirshner's Rock Concert.
Yeah.
And they would play that at 11:30 or midnight on a Saturday night. And they would play bands that we never got to hear on the radio. So that was a huge part of my taste in music's come from that. Cheap Trick and Ted Nugent, all those great guys we just didn't see. So it was fantastic.
One episode that I have coming up, Michael, you'll be interested in, is I have Preston Fraser, author Preston Fraser, who's been on before. He's got a new book out on Yes, but he focuses on just the years without John Anderson, which I think is really interesting. Maybe I'll get you as a new subscriber to the podcast. So
That sounds great. I'll look forward to that.
Yeah, I'll let you know when that goes up.
And a classic example of Yes history that, I remember Drama, a great album.
Right.
It was the number one album for the year in the USA. It got nothing in Australia. Didn't even make a ripple. So that's how different the music industry is on different sides of the world. So we heard absolutely nothing from that album, and it was the number one album of the year in the USA. So that's crazy, isn't it?
But on the reverse side, Kiss, that same year, because I think Drama came out in 1980, Kiss in 1980 was dead in the water here in the States, yet in Australia, huge.
Yeah, I was one of those guys that lined up for forever to get a ticket. And I guess, again, because it was so long, that was the first time Kiss had ever been to Australia. So they were on our radar since Alive came out in 75. So it took a long, the 5-year period that Kiss fans didn't get to see them. So it was a very big deal. And yes, Kiss, you're right. Kiss's favour had fallen out in the US, and maybe not so much in Europe, but also that I guess that worked in our favour, that it was an opportunity to take them somewhere else in the world that they were still going to make some money.
Well, let me ask you this: did you know that Ace Frehley was not the band when you were getting the ticket for that show? Because it wasn't publicized all that much, was it?
Not that I recall. No, Peter Criss had left.
Peter Criss, Vinnie Vincent was there, I believe, when you had gone to see them, but maybe not, because they had Peter out first, and then Ace was on the cover of Creatures of the Night. He didn't play on that album, and then Vinnie Vincent was on the tour.
I think it's just on the edge of that time, because Unmasked was quite popular here in Australia at the time, and Ace played on that, didn't he?
He did, and he was on that tour.
It may have actually even been the last time he came with in that period of the band. But the guys have been back so many times since, and that's a great example. Once Kiss came to Australia and realised they had such a huge fan base here, and still today they've come back regularly ever since. And Ace has played in clubs here in Australia. Gene's done some solo gigs here. Like Ace Frehley's solo band just. Well, I saw them in a club here a few years ago, and my hearing still hasn't recovered, but they were sensational.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
The curtain will go up on Act 2 after our short intermission.
Speaking of Kiss, let's stay on that topic, because you did have Bruce Kulick on your show, and Bruce Kulick was the guitarist of Kiss throughout most of the 80s into the 90s. And one of the interesting things that he talked about with you was regarding the MTV Unplugged show in 1996. And you asked him about that because it led to the reunion with the original four guys. You asked Bruce about the story that was out there that was Bruce who suggested Ace and Peter be part of that show. Do you remember what his response was?
Yes. And then it sort of came back to bite him, didn't it? It was so successful, and it snowballed into the reunion, and Eric and and Bruce sort of got pushed to the side, which I think he was very, upset about at the time. But I think in hindsight, I guess the passage of time, he's learnt to live. I guess it always had to happen, but yeah, it was. I think it was really his doing that made it happen. But I guess he didn't know that the MTV thing would be such a huge sensation that everyone loved to see those guys back on stage. So
Yeah, I think he told you, hey, wouldn't it be cool to have Ace up there? And then I think maybe it was Eric Singer who was like, hey, if we're going to have Ace, let's have Peter come in. It was something very innocent enough. It wasn't like there was any grand plan. It wasn't like Paul and Gene were thinking of anything. They just figured, okay, let's try it. And then they saw the reaction that it got. And then, of course, the reunion. Now, let's talk about David Lee Roth. As you know, you saw the behind me, the banner, the Van Halen banner. So I'm a huge Dave fan. And you had Stevie Vai on your show, and Stevie was on those first two solo albums from Dave. Amazing guitarist. Also in a band called Alcatraz. And here's a small world story. Their bassist, Gary Shea, had him on the show here. Grew up right here in my hometown of Southington, Connecticut, like right down the road. But you asked Stevie about his first gig with Alcatraz.
Yngwie was in the band, and everybody loved Yngwie, and everyone. I think from memory, I think the gig was in San Francisco, and everyone the auditorium was full, and everyone was chanting Yngwie, and Steve Vai comes out on the stage, and from what Steve said, the audience just went quiet. Who is this guy? And as soon as he started to play, oh wow.
Yeah, he's on that one album. Is it Disturbing the Peace? He might have been on. Yeah, that's a great album.
Absolutely. And Steve was one of those guys that I thought, there's no way Steve Vai is going to talk to me. Like, no, and I made an approach to his PR people, and I've spoken to him 3 times since. He is the loveliest guy, and he's such an easy person to interview. He loves to chat, and he loves to talk about music and guitars and guitarists that he's met around. He's just a lovely fella. So
he's not a mudslinger. He never says anything bad about anybody. He's always got great things to say.
He discovered a young lady here in Adelaide when he was here, and at the time she was 14 years old, and her name is Orianthe.
Oh yes.
She's in recent years come to live in the States. Her partner is Richie Sambora.
Mm-hmm.
And they record together, and she is a killer guitar player. He came across her, as I said, 14-year-old girl here in Adelaide playing on her own. She jumped up on the stage supporting him with a backing track, and just her. And as you can imagine, the room was full of every musician in Adelaide, and everyone's jaw hit the floor. She was just blew everyone away. So yeah, amazing girl, and we're very chuffed to see what a great career she's had since.
You talked with legendary drummer Carmine Appice, Vanilla Fudge, Cactus, Beck Bogart and Appice, Rod Stewart, King Cobra. He played with Ozzy for a bit. What a resume. The one thing that would be missing from drummers who would come after guys like Carmine is that certain swing, and that's because Carmine grew up in an era, like he talked to you about, where there weren't rock drummers. It was jazz drummers. It was Gene Krupa. It was Buddy Rich, guys like that. He shared his thoughts on that with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if it all comes back from those two guys. When you go and watch those two guys on YouTube and watch Buddy Rich and those guys play, they are just unbelievable players, and every rock drummer owes so much to those guys. But Carmine again was, to my mind, just this rock star god, and to talk to him just blew me away. I first saw him play. He came to Australia with Rod Stewart's band in about 1977, I think, and I didn't know much about him, but he made such an impact that I went back and looked at his career. And again, such a lovely guy. And I've spoken to him again since. And, there's as you said, there's so much that he's done, and he had very similar stories about Ozzy and Sharon that Bob Daisley had. So it was really interesting to compare notes about how he was treated in the Ozzy Osbourne camp. Fascinating stuff.
Trying to remember, when did he work with Ozzy?
I think in the early 80s, maybe 83-ish, 84.
Okay.
Because he did a tour of the States, and whoever was sponsoring him, drum kit wise, I can't remember who it was, wanted him to do clinics, as those guys do. And apparently Sharon got a nose out of joint and wouldn't even let him do that. Like, it's just crazy. Like, so just so controlling on the guys that people he added to the show. Like, what better is it to come and see these guys? As much as we love Ozzy, he always had such great players. You go to see them as well, don't you?
Legendary Jethro Tull frontman Ian Anderson was on your show. What did he have to say about revisiting the past material? Because he tours with Tull, he tours solo, and he's smart enough to know which audiences want what, depending on where he's playing, right?
And he was one of the guys that I thought, when you haven't done an interview with somebody, you think, oh, he's going to be really hard work. And he had a reputation as being could be a bit testy. And he was just fantastic. I couldn't shut him up. He just chatted and chatted. We chatted for well over an hour, and he was lovely. He just, again, I think because I was interested in the music, and yes, he does have a very good understanding of his fans that want to hear the run of the mill Jethro Tull, excuse me, but the other stuff that he does. But he likes people. One of the things that I remember is that he really appreciates the people to sit and listen to his music. He wants you to hear what he's playing. So back in the old days, I think he referred to them as a Led Zeppelin crowd, carrying on and making noise and dancing around. He didn't really like that. He wanted people to listen to the music. So, but again, he was such a lovely fella.
Yeah, speaking of Zeppelin, he talks about Robert Plant maintaining his integrity, how he could have easily took a money grab and done these Zeppelin reunion tours. He really appreciates that about Plant. I think Ian Anderson has that same mindset too. It's the integrity that he wants to keep intact.
Yeah, it's it must be very difficult, and I'm sure there's people in Robert Plant's ear even now that are saying, come and do it, come and do it, come and do it, and does it really achieve anything? And yeah, it's a hard call, isn't it? As a fan, it's a hard call.
Sure. Well, the fans want it. But Plant never seemed to. It wasn't something that, again, it wasn't a money grab for him. Even when he rejoined Page for the Page and Plant stuff, it was to rework some of the songs that they did together. It wasn't going to be just like a carbon copy. The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this.
The time has come for someone to put his foot down, and that foot is me.
Michael Adelaide is the author of Sitting in a Bar in Adelaide, 15 Years of Podcasting. Book is out now. One of the artists you interviewed who has sadly passed was Greg Kihn, famous for his hits in the 80s, Jeopardy, the breakup song. Greg talks about Joe Satriani being in his band. Joe Satriani, I didn't even realize was in his band at one point. When was that?
Back in the early days of the Greg Kihn band. Yeah, and Joe Satriani was the rhythm guitarist. Like, how crazy is that?
Crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Greg Kihn, again, a lovely, lovely fella. And, again, what was planned for maybe a 15 to 20-minute interview went for an hour and a half. He's just such a lovely fella. And that's, I guess, one of the things that make the book a bit more important for me is so many guys like Greg that I've spoken to have gone and not here anymore. So it makes it a bit special that I got to talk to those guys. And and he discovered Joe, and just that they were playing clubs in, I think, San Francisco back then, and Joe just went on to be this phenomenal guitar wizard. So it's amazing when you see how guys like that started off. But Steve Vai was similar. He was playing rhythm guitar with Frank Zappa back in and Yeah, look what he's doing now. He's taken it to a level that we didn't even think that you could take a guitar to that level. So yeah, amazing.
In 2018, you interviewed John Waite, who sang with the Babies, had a huge solo hit single with Missing You, later fronted the band Bad English with members of Journey. Going back to that single, Missing You, he did something really interesting with that song with Alison Krauss.
Yeah, he did, and to take such a well-known tune that people knew across the world, and to remake it into a country in inverted commas tune. What a great job they did. And Alison Krauss has done that, as you mentioned, Robert Plant before. She's and she's brought her music to someone like me. She would not be on my radar, but she's crossed over to guys like me that are rock fans, and I'm an Alison Krauss fan. I've really gone and looked at what she does. So it's a great thing. One of the great things that John spoke about back in the early mid 80s, there was, satellites were a new thing, and satellite television, and they would beam interviews into clubs. So, and they did one with Bad English here in Adelaide, and I remember watching it. It was on. They played it on television as well. But I remember asking him about that, and he said they'd come off a gig, and they were, whatever substances they were on, they were totally off their trolleys when they did that interview. So he could remember it. So I thought that was really fun.
Yeah, he's had an amazing career too. I just saw him out on the road. I think this summer I saw him on YouTube playing some shows. I believe it was this past summer. So he's still going.
The Babies were booked to come here late last year, and the tour got cancelled. I would have loved to have seen them. To my knowledge, they've never been to Australia. So and the first two Babies albums were huge here. So I would have loved to have seen them. So fingers crossed, maybe down the track they'll come back and see us.
Fee Waybill, the frontman of the Tubes, he was on your show in 2012. The Tubes, known for their elaborate stage shows, and he told you about how the band would spare no expenses to get the best stage show there was, but there was an escalating list of expenses on their riders, much of it spent on chocolate.
Yeah, and what a crazy story that they just did weird things like their tour expenses were just nuts. Yeah,
dancers,
yeah.
Right? It was the dancers that were requesting chocolate.
but again, he was a guy that I never thought I'd get to interview, and the interview went for so long. I think it was a 3-hour episode of the program and again,
wow.
The guys have never played in Australia. The Tubes have never been here. If I win Lotto and can afford to bring them to Australia, I would love to have them play. Fee did a promotional tour out here when Completion Backward came out, just a chat tour. But the band has never played here. I'd love to see them. So
why is it that so few bands tour there? Not a lot of radio airplay.
I think a lot of the mid-level bands, like I said, I guess, and they're a lot bigger in the States. Styx and Kansas and the Tubes can fill a big hall in the United States, but they would be playing in sort of 2,000 seaters here. So the financial risk for a promoter to bring them out is, has always been a bit of a challenge. There's some guys in New Zealand called Greenstone Entertainment that in New Zealand in January they have two public holiday weekends in a row, and they do three big outdoor concerts there every year in those 2 weekends, and they bring bands out to New Zealand that have never come to Australia. As an example, REO Speedwagon have done it, and so they're clever enough to bring those guys out because people want to see them. Occasionally, there's an Australian promoter that will grab them and bring them to Sydney and Melbourne for 1 or 2 gigs. Lynyrd Skynyrd is an example. They've never really toured Australia, but did 2 gigs on the back of this. So I don't think Australian promoters are really that adventurous either, which is really frustrating. So yeah, but again, these guys are getting older, and I guess it's harder for them to they can go to Europe not have to travel so much, and they know they're going to make money, and so it's difficult.
Well, that's more of a factor even nowadays as opposed to the old days. You did have John Anderson on your show, John Anderson of Yes, and you brought up an album that some may not know of that you're a big fan of called Sun Hillo.
The Elias of Sun Hillo was his first solo album,
1976.
and I don't really know if people appreciate what a great musician John Anderson is. He's known for his voice but he played every instrument on that album, and he came when he was, well, I'm not sure if to say he was kicked out of Yes, but when all that happened, he actually toured around the world on his own solo and came and played in a club here on his own, and he blew me away. He played every Yes tune you could ever want to hear just with him, and so that album is a great example of what a fine musician he is, as well as a great singer. So we don't sometimes when guys like that are in bands where the other musicians are so so great and sort of take over, that you don't really appreciate. And then he wrote a lot of those tunes. So again, a great, lovely fella, lovely to talk to. I've had him on the show multiple times. He's lovely.
And you talk about high praise. He said Van Morrison gave him a nice comment about that album.
Yes, and you wouldn't even expect those guys to be in similar to move in similar circles, would you?
Yeah. Colin Hay of Men at Work. You talked to him just a year after the death of his bandmate Greg Ham. A very sad story. First, can you talk about what happened with Greg as far as the copyright lawsuit, for those who may not be aware of that, how that affected him? And then following up with that, what did Colin have to say about that and Greg?
And I see Colin has got Men at Work back touring around the States at the moment with Toto and Christopher Cross. How cool is that? I'm so happy that he's out there and doing that. He's a great guy. It's just a sad story. So Greg Ham was, people may recall, with a flute player and songwriter in Men at Work, and a great part of the band, a huge part of the band. And there's a music quiz program in Australia called Rock Whiz, and it's a slash comedy show, but they made one of the, so they have a question and answer and a panel sort of show, and one of the questions they asked was, they played a little bit of an old Australian folk song called Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree, and played a little bit of the flute part from Down Under. And I still can't really collate where they got this from, but it was an off-the-cuff comment that the presenter made, that they were that he'd plagiarised that old Australian folk song, and it just snowballed from there. And
just that one moment.
Yeah, that one off the cuff comment just ruined Greg Ham's life, and just he ended up in court, and it sent him broken, and in the end he took his own life. It's just the saddest story. It's just and I think the guys in Men at Work still struggle with that. It was just an awful situation. Yeah, absolutely.
Were you not sure how Colin was going to respond? Were you a little cautious with how you're going to ask that?
I wasn't sure. It was one of those questions, do I bring up that topic or not? But I knew how much he loved Greg, and I think in Australia we could sympathise that it was just such a crazy situation, and I sort of went from that angle to say, how sorry that we all are that ended up like that, and I'm happy that he took it that way, that I wasn't trying to dig the dirt or anything. But
you delivered it with empathy, and I think he responded well.
But he's been living in California for years, and is the happiest man on the planet. There's a great doco made about him in the States, just maybe a few years old now, and I can't for the life of me remember the name of it, but it's on YouTube. It's really an awesome insight into how happy he is now working and playing around the US, and we all love him, and he's it's crazy how a Scotsman can come to Australia and write an iconic song about Australia and then go and live in the States. Crazy stuff.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
The future is now!
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock Podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock Podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. AC/DC, we mentioned them earlier. Let's talk about AC/DC. You had a really interesting interview with Dave Evans. Evans was the original singer of AC/DC. Many may not be aware of this, but the story was that Angus and Malcolm Young were not happy with Dave, and they either fired him or dismissed him, and then Bon Scott enters. The reasons vary on that, but what did he have to say about his time with the band?
He's a crazy guy, mate. I love Dave Evans. And I've actually had the pleasure of playing some gigs with his band, with
cool.
my band, supporting him. And the interview in the book was actually done in an outside cafe in Adelaide. So I was actually talking to another guy doing another interview, and Dave was wandering up and down the street. And this is 11 o'clock in the morning, wandering up and down the street in his leather pants, his stage gear at 11 in the morning. And we both knew him, and we waved to him, and he came over and he started chatting to us. So a fantastic guy. He's still a rock star in his own mind. And I love that.
Handled that well, because that's got to be one of those, damn, if I only stuck around.
I think it still really, really hurts him how he put his heart and soul into that band, and whether people agree or don't agree, he's really been written out of the history of AC/DC, which is very sad. But they, for his story was he lived in Sydney at the time and was, still had to pay his rent and was, had to live, and they really weren't paying him. So the poor guy is on the road and can't, he's getting, trying to keep his life in one piece, and he just wasn't being paid. So I think that was part of it. But it's a sad story that he really deserves to be recognised, and the real AC/DC fans around the world know that Dave Evans had a part in that. And the first tune that they recorded was "Can I Sit Next to You, Girl?"
Can I Sit Next to You, Girl? Yeah.
Song.
Then they re-recorded it with Bon.
Yeah, and that's a great version as well. When the original, it sounds a little bit dated, but it gives you an insight where AC/DC came from, and that's a great piece of history. Like I said, it's a shame that they don't recognise that as much as they should.
You got to share the story about when they played a wedding gig, AC/DC.
Yeah. So they played a wedding gig. So a friend of theirs lent them their PA, or I think he was lending them their PA system, and they said, "Oh, would you play at a wedding?" And they said, "Oh," and Dave said, "No, they were starting to get popular and getting paid a reasonable amount of money to play." And the guy said, "Oh, no, well, I'll pay you, your normal fee." So they played at a Greek wedding in someone's backyard, and of course they asked them to play Zorba the Greek, as you did, and they had, of course, had no idea how to play it. And the story is that Malcolm Young said, "Oh, just give me a moment," and he went off in the corner and noodled away on his guitar and worked out how to play it. So the band came back on and played an instrumental version of Zorba the Greek at a Greek wedding. How cool is that?
That's a great story. That's a great story.
Well, it'd be wonderful if there was footage of that. Nowadays, everyone would have recorded it on their phone, but back in 1974, they're probably, it's a shame. That would have been awesome.
Yeah, it's just left up to our imagination as to what that must have looked like. All right, let's finish with Bob Daisley, the bassist of Ozzy Osbourne. who I forgot, and I was reading about him after listening to your interview. He plays bass on not just those first two albums, but he's on No More Tears.
Yeah, he plays a really interesting role through Ozzy's early career. He's a great guy, a lovely guy, and he's probably one of the most regular guests I have on the program. He's come recently in recent years come back to live in Sydney. So he he left Sydney, he left Australia in the early 70s when he was, he really, and a lot of guys did. A lot of guys that wanted to make it in the music industry went to London to try and make their fortune. And Bob, he was only a kid. I think he borrowed money from his mum and dad, and went to England. And long story short, ended up playing with Ritchie Blackmore. So he played on Rainbow's album Long Live Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
And it was from there that he had a friendship with Ronnie Dio, and ended up working with Ozzy. So he is the only Australian who has ever played in any of those hard rock bands. He's done so much fantastic stuff with Carmine, you mentioned before, and played with John Sykes and all those guys in Blue Murder. So fascinating career. And
that's right, Blue Murder. I forgot about. That's a great album.
Absolutely, and lots of bands that again should have been huge, but I think maybe did better in the States and Europe than in Australia. They didn't really, even Rainbow were not really a hugely popular band here, sadly.
Now I'm trying to remember. Did Bob and drummer Lee Kerslake, did they have to audition for Ozzy's band after Ozzy left Sabbath?
Well, the story was that Bob had a heads up that Ozzy had. Well, let me go back a step. Bob was earmarked to go and play with Ronnie Dio because Ronnie had left Rainbow, and apparently got a message that Ronnie had been offered the gig in Sabbath, that Ozzy had left or been shuffled sideways from Sabbath. So he went. He knew. I think a mutual friend suggested to Bob to go and have a drink at a pub with Ozzy, and they got on really well, and got together and started writing some tunes. And Randy Rhoads was not in the picture back then. I think it was just some roadies of Ozzy's that were playing music with him in Ozzy's house. and it all snowballed from there. So Lee Kerslake had played in Uriah Heep with Bob, so Bob knew him as a drummer. But apparently they auditioned lots and lots of drummers, and Lee finally got the gig. But and a great drummer he was, but I think he fell out of favor with Sharon because he didn't, he was getting on. I think he was in his 40s or 50s and didn't look the rock star that they wanted. Tommy Aldridge in the band for whatever reason, and that was a sort of the root of all evil for Bob, that he was loyal to Lee Kerslake and didn't want him shuffled out of the band just because they wanted someone else. So I think that's where it all started. So, but fascinating stuff.
It's fascinating, and that was hard enough. Obviously, he's dealing with no longer being in Ozzy's band, but then there's the legal battles that he eventually has with Ozzy and Sharon. Talk about this controversy again for those who may not be too familiar with this whole thing. It was over songwriting. It was because actually Bob had some input in terms of those songs on those first two albums.
Absolutely.
Him and Ozzy had a good songwriting combination. In fact, he praised how Ozzy could write those great melodies over the music that was presented to him. But there was an issue with that with Sharon, and then there's the re-recordings. Tell us about all that.
Yeah. It's just crazy that the guys were not getting credited for their songwriting, and sometimes we're only getting a performance payment and no royalties from the albums. But yeah, it's really hard to fathom taking a step back and seeing how that happened. But then the crazy thing is that Bob left as a playing member of Ozzy's band, because the first tour, when they came, they toured Europe and the UK for a little while, and then brought Randy to the US. But Bob didn't play. Rudy Sarzo took over So things are already, a bit crazy back then. But then Bob had gone back in subsequent albums and done more songwriting. So he did really love Ozzy. Like they got on very well and they worked well together. But I don't want to throw mud at Sharon, but I think the business side of it just soured it all, which is again really sad because they made great music together. Those first Ozzy albums still stand up as the greatest things he's made. So
Oh my God, yeah. Now, did the re-recordings lead to the legal battles?
I think that was part of it. Yeah, and again, why would I can't
When
fathom
was
why,
that, by the way, Michael? When did they? I forget when the re-recordings were. Is that late 80s?
later on in the 80s. Yeah,
It was.
And again, I don't understand why they went down that path.
Why? Yeah.
Yeah, and again, Tommy Aldridge, great drummer, and I haven't had the pleasure of speaking to him, but I think he's a great guy. But I don't understand why Sharon was so adamant to bring him into the band. But politics, and because her father was Don Arden, so he was known from Jet Records back in those days as a very, very hard businessman. You didn't muck around with him. There's stories of him threatening to throw people out of his office window. So I think he was a very nice guy.
Yeah. So she just was just kind of taking a shot at those two guys, like removing them from those albums was her way of getting him. Just, I don't understand. It was, that she ever said why she did it?
Not that I'm aware of. No. I think it was, I'm really not sure whether it's to cut those guys out of the royalty stream that I'm not sure if they were getting any royalties back then. But you do see bands do crazy things like that, and I'm really not sure what that achieves. But
well, there was the Van Halen story when they had the falling out with Michael Anthony and Wolfgang was in the band. On their official website, on the album covers that they displayed of all the Van Halen albums, they replaced Michael Anthony on that first album. The first album cover where you see all four guys. They put Wolfgang on there.
Yes, and it's just,
and Van Halen fans were not happy about that.
No, and I don't understand the logic between doing that. It's a piece of history. It's the band's history. Leave it be. Like what does that achieve?
So tell me when Ozzy passed away, I would imagine Bob was the first guy you thought of.
Yeah, and sadly, the last few times that I've had him on the program have been similar situations. That he played with Gary Moore, he played with Ronnie Dio, as I've mentioned before. So we've done a program together on those guys, mainly because he is the only Aussie that played with those guys. But then, yeah, when Ozzy passed away, there was not anything around. All the media around the world didn't really mention the guys that helped Ozzy get there in his solo career. Randy Rhoads had a little bit of a mention, but and I wrote a note to Bob and said, I wish there was someone would mention, how great Ozzy's first band was and how you set the path for his career, and he'd written. Bob had actually written an article for a national newspaper called The Australian. It's, I guess, similar to, is it USA Today is the national newspaper? Similar to that. And he'd written a great article on how, what they did in their early days and how much he loved Ozzy and what they did together. So I was really happy to see that, and I think that started to go out around the world a bit. And so, it was still only about a week after Ozzy's passing that we had a chat, and Bob was very, very emotional about that. As I said, they were really good friends. I think even all the water under the bridge that happened business wise and money wise didn't really affect their friendship. I think they still had that that similar sense of humor. I think in their younger days they were pretty crazy guys. So
that was great to hear. Yeah, there were many things that I really was interested in when I listened to that last interview you did with him, where he's talking about, he reminded everybody, don't forget that wasn't Ozzy Osbourne's solo project. That was called Blizzard of Oz. The band was called Blizzard of Oz.
Yeah. And isn't that a great story, how that just changed? And Bob wasn't aware that had changed until the album came out. It's crazy. Like, again, it's just behind the scenes, someone finger poking, and yeah, if you there's there's promo photographs of the Blizzard of Oz band, which was Randy, Lee, and Bob and Ozzy, and no mention of actual Ozzy's name. It was a new band, so yeah, how quickly that changed.
Yep. And he brought up the point. He says, I'm the only surviving member of that band, which is really hard to believe. But
Yeah, which is a little bit sad when you think about that. It's as I said at the start of our chat, Eric. From my era, a lot of those guys are getting into their 70s and 80s and are no longer with us. So it's we have to cherish that music, and when we get a chance to go and see these guys, and that gets me off the couch. Sometimes the last thing I want to do is go out in the middle of winter and see a band. It's like, no, I've got to go because it may be the last time you see these guys, and sometimes it is. So, yeah.
he did. I think he talked a little bit about the process of songwriting that took place back in those days on those albums. I think it would be him and Lee and Randy kind of jamming on stuff, and then they would present it to Ozzy. And again, Ozzy would come in and come up with these great melodies over the music. It was a really good chemistry that they had.
Yes, absolutely. And I think if they would have stayed together as a unit, although the second album is still very, very good. I think the all I love all Ozzy's work. It's all great stuff, but those two albums just stand out above the rest. For I think that chemistry and that songwriting chemistry makes the difference. And Crazy Train, for instance, is the song that people think of from Ozzy's solo career, and every time I see a ball game or something from the States, it's quite often used to bring the sports team out. People love that song, so
it is in every stadium around the country with that lead off. You hear Ozzy screaming all aboard. Yeah, I'm sure you got a chance to see that final concert, the farewell concert for Ozzy and Sabbath.
And the sad thing was that I saw some footage of it, and I think the day after I'd heard that Ozzy had passed away, because I was a bit slow getting to see it, and it was quite a shock. Yeah,
shocking, but boy, what a way to end a career and a life. It's like he literally,
yeah, absolutely,
like they say, you're gonna die on the stage. I mean, he really came damn close to it. And that's a great way for him to say goodbye to the fans, to all of the, to pay tribute to all the people that he worked with and all the fans around the world. So it was a fitting end. I wish Ozzy was still with us, because I'm a huge Ozzy fan, and just the guy, a body of work that's unmatched between Sabbath and solo. It's amazing. The Booked on Rock podcast will be back after this.
Don't go away, gentlemen. We may need all of you.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases. And before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. Sitting in a Bar in Adelaide, 15 years of podcasting is out now, and you can find it wherever books are sold. I have the Kindle version.
They've really changed publishing. They've really made it so easy for guys like me to get stuff out there. I'm really amazed how the world has changed for the better. Everyone says the internet has got good things and bad things, but it really has. Podcasting and publishing is just changed the world.
I agree. That's why we're sitting here right now, and I'm speaking to you from the U.S. and you're out there in Australia, and we're talking rock and roll, man. It's great. And where can people find you, Michael? Tell us about where people can listen to the show, any websites, social media.
Yeah, and anywhere that you grab your podcast from, just put in Sitting in a Bar in Adelaide. So, and I don't have a lot of my historical stuff up, because one of the things I'm passionate about is keeping independent. I could get sponsors and I could do it, another way and make money out of it. But I want to be able to do how I do it, and I want to talk to people I want to talk to. I don't want to be told what to do, and so it makes there's not always so much stuff out there, but
no, I hear you. Creative control. You got control over everything. You don't have to anybody.
I like to be able to. I don't like to be told, you only have a half an hour, or, you can't talk to this person or that person. Well, that's important to me, and that's what I love about podcasting. It does give you that freedom and my program is on terrestrial radio here in Australia, so I cut, I can sort of work that as well, and that can sort of do both. So that's, I'm really chuffed that I'll get to do that.
Michael Adelaide, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Eric. Great to talk to you, mate. Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
That's it. It's in the books.